Israel says it is delaying the release of more than 600 Palestinian prisoners and detainees until the release of the next group of hostages is guaranteed. They were due to be freed in exchange for 6 hostages released from Gaza on Saturday. In a statement, the office of Israel's Prime Minister demanded an end to the, quote, degrading ceremonies that Hamas has held when releasing Israeli hostages. Hamas forced 2 hostages still in captivity to attend one of the handover ceremonies in Gaza on Saturday and record a propaganda video while they watched other hostages being freed. Well, let's speak now with Laura Blumenfeld. She is a Middle East analyst and has served as a policy advisor on the US State Department's Israeli-Palestinian negotiating team. Great to have you on the show. Thanks for joining us. So 2 hostages still in captivity were forced to watch the release of other hostages today in Gaza. What do you make of this move by Hamas? Is this psychological warfare?
Yeah, I think that the Israelis just decided that the 4 dead bodies are not worth the live stream of psychological torture, which is exactly what happened today. There are 4 remains, bodies that were supposed to be released this Thursday. And although I think it's a bump, not a complete breach in this path, of releases, I do think they just felt like enough is enough, that we can't tolerate the humiliation. Even worse than the harm and the physical harm is the sort of moral degradation. There was a moment last Thursday when they were releasing the coffins of those 2 children, 4-year-old and a 9-month-old, and what was supposed to be their mother, and an 83-year-old kibbutznik, where there was a Palestinian woman standing on the side and sort of laughing and saying, the Israelis are not as smart as we are. And so I think that this war has always been about a kind of, not only of war of will, but of war of wits. And it's not so much about Israeli being strong, because they clearly were strong on October 7th, but they were not as smart as they should have been. And I think that's what's so humiliating for Netanyahu and those in power. And so they're just sort of, laying down the line and saying enough is enough. We're not going to go forward.
All right, well, the end of the first phase is now delayed. Could we just see an extension of the first phase, i.e. more hostages released for Palestinian detainees?
Yes, and I think what we're witnessing now is just the ugliest of arm wrestles as they're figuring out who's going to have the upper hand for the next stage. I don't think it's a complete halt. You saw the condition of those hostages who are being released. It's almost too frail to fail. I think they will go forward. You saw Israeli opposition politicians saying that it's both a moral and a security imperative to release the hostages. The Israeli public is very much supporting the ceasefire. You even had Arab political parties, Israeli Arab political parties, saying, Netanyahu, we will be your safety net. If you're afraid of risking your coalition, that your right-wing cabinet members will bolt if you proceed, we will make sure that you can stay in power. Some people say this is all about Netanyahu and domestic politics. So you've got kind of the whole country saying, no more revenge, let's just go for the release.
Let's talk about the state of negotiations. What are they? What are they at the moment?
Well, they're fragile, but I do think that they will go forward. We're looking at the beginning of the second phase. That's where we should be right now. The U.S. Special Envoy, Steve Witkoff, is in Miami this evening negotiating with Netanyahu's personal kind of right-hand man, Ron Dermer. Dermer is originally from Miami. There's almost a little bit of a Florida mafia, Miami mafia here, but they sort of see eye to eye. Donald Trump has given Netanyahu not only carte blanche, but I would say an American Express platinum card on next stage going forward. He's released the 2,000-pound bombs. He's told him, do what you have to do. So there's certainly no daylight between the United States and Israel. That is different than the negotiating position when Netanyahu was dealing with President Biden, where Biden was always pushing for a ceasefire in the Middle East and supporting Zelensky in Ukraine. I think we're kind of seeing a reversal of that today, where there's strong pressure on Ukraine to settle, and saying to the Israelis, we're right with you. The U.S. Special Envoy for Hostages said Hamas will face total annihilation, and that's a quote, if they don't release the 4 American bodies that are being held and the 1 American alive. His name is Eden Alexander. Remember that name, because he could be the guy who leads us out of this mess.
All right, well, let's talk about some of the sticking points, though, in order to get to and through phase 2.
Well, yeah, so it's the same sticking point we've been stuck on now for 16 months, which is that Israel wants Hamas to disarm and also leave the Gaza Strip. They want them out, lay down your weapons and leave. There's no way forward with Hamas. There's no light at the end of those Hamas tunnels. There's no political future. Hamas is willing to sort of give up political control, but they don't want to give up security control. And it's a non-starter. If you think about it, it's not even so much about, we see the young men who were released today, the Israeli hostages, but let's just think about the 83-year-old who came home in a coffin on Thursday, Oded Lifshitz. He was a peacenik for his whole life. He believed in coexistence. He was a left-wing journalist. And then when he retired, he drove Palestinians cancer patients who needed to go to the hospital from Gaza into Israel. And he ended up dead at the bottom of a Hamas tunnel. So for Israelis, it's really the bigger problem are people like that who dedicated their lives and believed in peace and ended up dead in a horrible war. So I think that's really the sticking point, is that there is no coexistence, because this isn't about two states. It's about one state without Jews.
We'll leave it there. Laura Blumenfeld, thanks for joining us on DW News.
Thank you.
Well, hundreds of Palestinians held in Israeli jails were due to be freed in exchange for the hostages, but their release has been delayed. Journalist Sami Sockol joins me now from Jerusalem. Sami, hi there. There's still no sign of the Palestinian detainees and prisoners. What's the reason for the hold-up?
Yeah, well, there hasn't been any official statement explaining why they're postponing the release. I spoke to the spokesperson of the Israel Prison Service, and he's saying that they're waiting for the decision that will come from the political echelon. And we know that Netanyahu is holding consultations as we're speaking with heads of the Israeli military and others, and they're now discussing exactly this, the release of these prisoners, and they're contemplating other steps that they want to take against the Palestinians in the Gaza Strip, maybe even blocking some of the aid. The mood in these circles, especially from the Prime Minister, and this is what his critics are saying, is that he's trying to avoid fulfilling this agreement. Others are saying that he's angry because Hamas brought a body which wasn't the body of Shiri Bibas. Eventually, they did bring a body that was identified as the captive Shiri Bibas. Nevertheless, Netanyahu has said that this is a violation of the agreement. So there are many reasons that could be there.
OK, and Hamas is accusing Israel of violating the ceasefire agreement by delaying the prisoner release. Where does that leave this phase of the ceasefire?
Yeah, well, it puts it in a very tough position. If you would be asking now families of hostages, they will be telling you that Netanyahu is trying to avoid going into phase 2, and they're very concerned. We've heard voices over this weekend that Israel now has to go into a war in the Gaza Strip, kind of like a retaliation for what has been happening with the Bibas family. And at the same time, we also hear that the Israeli government is attempting to extend the first phase. And the reason they want to extend the first phase is so as to get more Israeli hostages from the Gaza Strip, but without announcing that they're ending the war. So they want to go back to the war and topple Hamas and destroy its military capabilities. So we hear a lot of that, but we're still waiting.
Thanks a lot for that, Sami. That's Sami Sockol in Jerusalem.